One would expect gameplay to be the most important aspect of a video game. However, some games attempt to prioritize narrative to provide an immersive storytelling experience not typically seen in other mediums. The choose-your-own-adventure interactive novel genre of video games has been around for a while. Many gamers are familiar with critically acclaimed titles such as What Remains of Edith Finch and Until Dawn, while Telltale Games have carved out their own niche in the gaming landscape in the same way that chick lit or teen fiction has done in the realm of literature. In recent years, games by David Cage have taken this genre and pushed it to new limits, introducing high-end production quality with narratives that branch so much that it can be dizzying at times. With all these titles available, it would be easy to make the argument that this field is oversaturated. However, in 2015, a title by Don't Nod Studios came along that managed to garner itself a bit of a cult following, and one that is, at least in my opinion, not undeserved. The game didn't have the best graphics or the largest production budget, but it did manage to resonate with a huge audience. There are a few factors we can attribute to the success of Life is Strange. The soundtrack, for instance, is particularly noteworthy. It features a melancholic indie soundtrack with twangy guitar strings and navel-gazing crooning that crafts a nostalgic feeling of beauty and depression swirling together. I don't generally listen to this kind of music, but it was still shockingly adept at putting me right back into my angsty teen shoes. For those who play this game, the power of the soundtrack is best displayed the first time the player enters the halls of Blackwell Academy. The melancholy music, combined with the non-stop high school archetypes, has the effect of making many players feel as though they are right back in high school with all its terrifying social dimensions and atmosphere of excitement, confusion, sadness, and hope. Another factor we could look at is the narrative. The story centers around Max Caulfield, a teenage girl who attends Blackwell Academy and has a keen interest in photography. She can be timid at times, but she cares a lot for those close to her. Max discovers she has the ability to turn back time, and although the rules for how time rewinding works can be wonky at times, it was intuitive enough for players to get the hang of. In its own way, the time reversing ability could be thought of as a metaphor for puberty and coming of age. I mean, it's a time of dealing with a lot of confusion, responsibility, and one suddenly finds themselves with a web of decisions to make. Will I go to this party, or will I stay home like my parents said? Will I date this person or not? Where do my loyalties lie? At the same time, you're confronted with heightened levels of freedom that are as attractive as they are intimidating. Trying to navigate this complex time can sometimes feel like trying to control some kind of new power. In many ways, Max's ability to control time is magic realism used to metaphorize the process of understanding oneself and therefore being able to function in the world. However, what I plan to focus on today is not Max Caulfield or her powers. It's not even the soundtrack or the gameplay mechanics. Instead, I want to discuss one of the secondary characters and how they reveal something very important about human nature, life and death. I am talking about Kate Marsh, a fellow Blackwell Academy classmate of Max's. To be specific, I will be discussing the theme of suicide, how it manifests in Kate's narrative, and what I believe players can take from this. To assist, I'll be making use of Thomas Joyner's theories on suicide. Now, before I jump into the meat and potatoes of this video essay, a few warnings. Firstly, this video will contain spoilers. Life is Strange is quite old, but undoubtedly there are many gamers who have yet to play it. My advice is to please play the game before watching the video. The first episode, as far as I know, is free, so you can get a taste for the story to see if you like it. Secondly, This video essay will be dealing with themes of suicide and mental health. So if any viewers have any issues with these themes, it would be best to exit this video now. When I first came across Life is Strange, I was going through a bad time in my life. Perhaps the worst. I was entirely suicidal and had made plans to kill myself. I played the game and much of my emotional states blended into the narrative, and Max's sadness became mine. But the character I related to most wasn't Max. It was Kate Marsh. Kate is a Blackwell Academy student who comes from a fundamentalist Christian family. To those around her, she's known as the good girl, and it is important for her to keep up this appearance, both for others and for her own sense of self. This all comes to a halt, however, when Kate attends a Vortex Club party. There, she becomes inebriated, and there is a video taken of her making out with lots of guys at the party. The video is distributed online by Victoria Chase, the queen bee of Blackwell High's social world, and it quickly goes viral. In an instant, Kate's reputation and life are upturned. The video is a fall from grace, and with its popularity comes heaps of shame, regret, self-disgust, guilt, and embarrassment for Kate. She is ridiculed by her peers and shunned by some of her family when they discover the video. The emotional effect of this on Kate is devastating. Following the spread of the video, Kate becomes withdrawn and more reserved than usual. These are classic symptoms of depression, yet very few of her peers recognize them, except perhaps for Max Caulfield. Kate's story comes to a climax in episode 2 of Life is Strange, where Kate attempts suicide. She travels up to the top of a building and readies herself to jump. However, Max reaches her before she can do so. At this moment, Max is unable to use her powers, and the player is left with the task of successfully talking Kate away from the ledge. It is a high-stakes situation because failure to save Kate means she's dead. Forever. Playing it was an incredibly moving moment for me. Each option I chose was carefully selected based on what I thought would best soothe Kate. I now know that most of the information necessary to save Kate could have been ascertained by simply paying attention prior to this moment. However, I must admit that although I was able to save Kate, it wasn't because I had concrete information on her. Rather, I felt my way through, and I was fortunately enough to pull Kate away from the ledge. There are a number of factors that work together to make this moment a powerful one. What stood out to me the most was how well Kate's story tracks the journey to suicide in a manner that one can both understand and sympathize with. To better understand this, it would be worth taking a look at Thomas Joyner and his interpersonal theory of suicide. Thomas Joyner is a rather interesting scholar. He is a notable figure in the field of suicidology. His text, Myths About Suicide, was weirdly comforting to me at a very dark place in my life. It gave a lot of what I was feeling validation, rather than brushing off the darkness as mere angst or an immature desire to run away from problems. He contextualized suicidality as a product of a breakdown in the elements that allow humans to continue living. His own work in suicidology is inspired by the death of his father, who died due to suicide. I feel as though this experience has given him insight into the suicidal state of mind that most others fail to grasp. A useful model he provides for understanding suicidality is the interpersonal theory of suicide. The interpersonal theory of suicide posits that 3 factors are necessary before someone will be in the position to take their own life. The first is perceived burdensomeness. In other words, feeling as though the world would be better off without you. One often hears the following phrases amongst the suicidal. I'm a burden on my family. All I do is bring badness to the world. I'm a blemish to this universe. It isn't impossible to understand why such feelings would lead to suicidality. Nobody wants to be a burden, especially to those we care about. A large component of a sense of fulfillment is the perception that one is capable of self-transcending and benefiting not just themselves, but those around them. Feeling as though we are a drain on our family or on society can easily trigger the thought that life isn't worth living or that death is worth more than life. The second factor Thomas Joyner mentioned is thwarted belongingness. If one feels shunned, rejected, or views society as something that they will never be a part of, then such feelings can lead to suicidality. Even the most introverted among us need a sense of belonging. The perception of absent social belongingness can catalyze depressive feelings. When I was at my lowest, one of the few things that would make me halt just a bit was thinking about those I would leave behind and how they would feel about it. However, when the darkness got too much, I could only focus on every single criticism I've ever received and all the times I'd been rejected. I don't believe that my perception of thwarted belongingness is a false one. I genuinely don't have any place in society, and this is one of the reasons I was suicidal and still struggle with clinging on to life to this day. I am disgusting and unwanted, and most of my journey from last year onwards has been me trying to understand how I'm supposed to cope with this while still finding reasons to live. These two factors, namely thwarted belongingness and perceived burdensomeness, are enough to make one feel extremely suicidal. However, humans have survival instincts that act as strong deterrents to suicide. Our most primitive areas of our brain crave survival. It's a higher order priority. It's this survival instinct that is likely behind the reason hesitation is common amongst the suicidal. Those wishing to jump will sometimes pace a bridge for extended periods of time, and while it is difficult to provide a numeric value for how often it happens, one can only imagine how many people you come across on a daily basis who have had a gun to their head the previous weekend, contemplated suicide for hours, and decided not to pull the trigger. Unscarred and unharmed, these people slink back into society, and nobody is any wiser. For this reason, a third factor is necessary. That factor is the capability to overcome the fear of death. This ability is one that can be acquired. It's one of the reasons those in law enforcement and in the military have high suicide rates. These are people who have been trained to act in high-stress, deadly situations. The fear of death that would paralyze the average person and draw them away from suicide is an obstacle that can be overcome with enough training. It's also one of the reasons why someone can improve their odds of committing suicide simply by having failed suicide attempts in the past. Each attempt is a brush with death, and each time one grows more adept at dealing with the fear that comes with it. As Thomas Joyner and Jessica Ribeiro write in an article, quote, adolescents who reported engaging in multiple methods of and having a longer history of non-suicidal self-injury were found to have the highest rates of past suicide attempts. Also, individuals who had the longest history of non-suicidal self-injury and reported the least pain during non-suicidal self-injury were approximately 2 times more likely than others to have attempted suicide in the past. Another means that one may acquire the ability to overcome the fear of death is through mental illness. This is the reason why depression, anxiety, and personality disorders are usually factors surrounding a suicide. Using Thomas Joyner's model helped shed light on Kate's journey to that building ledge. Kate was at a point in her life where she was overwhelmed with guilt and shame. What's worse is that she didn't only have to deal with her own thoughts. Rather, she had to deal with a social situation where others were actively shaming her. More so, the shaming was being done publicly on social media. This compounded her feelings of shame and was a catalyst for her sense of thwarted belongingness. Shame as a catalyst for suicide is fairly common. As John Kalafat and David Lester write, quote, "When we experience shame, then our desire is to hide, to withdraw from the situation. We fear facing those who know of our unworthiness, and we may, in some conditions, seek the ultimate withdrawal, suicide." This behavior is seen from Kate, who withdraws from society following the viral video. As Max writes in a diary when discussing Kate, she's been, quote, "extra quiet and introverted for the past couple of weeks." This would be bad enough to deal with, but Kate also has to tackle her feelings of perceived burdensomeness. It's easy to imagine how Kate would grow to feel burdensome in such a situation. Having once been the golden child of a conservative Christian family, she's now the bad girl. Rather than bringing honor to her family, she brings dishonor, and because of this, she may come to view herself not as an asset to her family, but as a deficit. The third factor Joyner mentions, namely the ability to overcome the fear of death, is not so explicitly obvious when analyzing Kate, and there is much room for speculation. Kate could have been suspect to conditions such as depression, which were exacerbated by the stress in her life. Alternatively, Kate could have been exposed to childhood traumas that brought her close to death. Either way, it's impossible to know for sure because we simply don't know enough about Kate. What we do know is that either through mental health issues or exposure to mortal situations, Kate had gained the ability to overcome the fear of death and was willing to kill herself. The beautiful thing about this tragic story, however, is that there is the possibility of saving Kate. And that, for me, is the thread of hope in Kate's story. What ultimately saves her isn't Max's powers, but rather her care, love, and compassion. When I was in a really dark place, I had a friend I could speak to, and that helped me immensely. More than that, I had my very special imaginary friends, Ashley Patan and Mercy Cooper, keeping me company during those times when all I could do was cry and wish I was dead. Friends and the warmth they bring to life can help us get through the hardest times. It is for this reason that it's so important that we cherish our friends. But more than that, it's why it's so important to be a good friend to those we care about. Take an active interest in the lives of your friends. Speak to them and find out what's going on in their lives. When they feel down, lend an ear, and when they have successes, be there to celebrate with them. Kate's story isn't a unique one. My story isn't a unique one. I know that there are people probably listening right now who are going through absolute hell, and all I can say is that, like Kate, you too can be saved. The message of hope that underlies Kate's story underlies your life too. There is life after tragedy, life after disaster, and life after mental illness. And if there's one message I can end this video on, it's this: your life is valuable, even if you don't belong, and even if you do feel worthless. Keep loving yourself, even when you don't feel like you're worth it. If you're lucky enough to have a good friend, don't be afraid to show them how much you care. And if you feel like taking your own life, please, please talk to somebody. You are stronger than you think you are, and you can make it through the suffering.